Hello everyone and welcome to another Tuesday evening on the 25 Tuesdays with Way, celebrating Widowed and Young's 25th anniversary. We've been talking to various people over the last, I think we're on maybe week 11 now, but over the last couple of months we've been talking to people on a Tuesday night, starting with the faces of Way and the people who have been a part of the charity's journey from its conception 25 years ago. And my name's Sam and I've been hosting a series on books and blogs. I'm a Way member. Sadly, I lost my late wife Lauren to breast cancer about 20 months ago, and found comfort in Way, as well as starting a blog that's called Making Lemonade. As a result, I've kind of helped Way with increasing their exposure and doing some pieces of work, and they kindly asked me to host some live Instagram lives with some of their fantastic past and present members who have all found that Way has supported them on their journey. We've been joined in the last few weeks by Justin Bowen, Emma Waring, and Lucy Brownlee. Today we speak to Steph Nimmo, who is sadly a young widow, also dealt with a significant amount and more grief than just that, and that's enough for most people. Next week, Holly Matthews joins us, formerly of Waterloo Road, and she'll be joining my colleague, I would suppose you'd call her, Emma, who's going to be hosting that conversation. And we'll have one more week after that with another Way member that has taken to writing as a form of helping them through their grief and bereavement. So I'll talk a little bit more about Steph before I invite her in. Steph sadly lost her husband Andy to bowel cancer at the same time as supporting a child, Daisy, who had life-limiting conditions. Steph has gone on to find real power in her pain, and about a year after Daisy, I'll let her tell you the story. So I'm going to invite Steph in now, and I'm really looking forward to this one. So let me see if I can find her request to join. There we go. Hello, Steph.
Hi Sam, hi, how are you doing? Hello everyone.
I'm good, thank you. How are you? We've got about 14 people with us at the moment. It's growing. Lots of people joining as we talk. And I know that based on the last few weeks, the feedback that I've had personally from the videos that have gone sort of on the Instagram live TV channel and the Way YouTube channel has been really positive. There's people that have taken some real comfort in some of the things we've spoken about. So it's really nice to be able to do this for people. And I'm really grateful that you've joined us, because you've got a particularly gripping story to tell and to share. And I chatted to you for a little while yesterday, and I find that when I talk to people who are that have not experienced a significant bereavement, they often say to me things like, "Oh, how did you cope?" And it's really inspirational how you've got through that, and so on and so forth. And I found myself feeling that when we were talking yesterday, because actually there was layers to your grief. So why don't you take us back to the start and tell us a little bit about your story, a bit about you and Andy and how you first met, and take us from there.
Yeah. So I'll take you all the way back many decades ago. I was at university, and that's where I met my husband. In fact, I mean, those that know me know the story that I was in the pub with my best friend Ali, and we were meeting up with friends, and this guy Andy had come along to visit a friend, and I remember nipping to the loo, my friend Ali going, "God, I don't like that Andy Nimmo. God, he's full of himself and tells crap jokes." Well, I ended up marrying him. So I was at uni, I was about 20. We came to London, I started a graduate traineeship for a telecoms company. Andy went to drama school. It was something he'd always wanted to do. And we kind of got on with our lives. We were very much the typical sort of London couple, trying to get on the housing ladder and trying to, pursue our careers. We got married, and then we decided to start a family. And our first son Theo was born in 1997. There, I'm going to be giving my age away a bit now. And then 2 years later, Xanthi, and then Jules. And then we both had always agreed that we wanted more than 2 children, and probably 3 or 4. So, it wasn't that difficult a decision to go for number 4. But that's really where things started to unravel a little bit, I think, because Daisy, from day one, there were a lot of problems. We were told at the first dating scan there was a 1 in 4 chance that she might have Down syndrome. And we had all sorts of tests and things, and the pregnancy was so much tougher than my other kids. She was born prematurely just before Christmas, and anyone that's ever met Daisy knows that's a typical Daisy move. Let's steal some limelight here. She spent 2 months in the neonatal unit, and it was very clear that something was wrong with her beyond prematurity. And not long afterwards, she was diagnosed with a very rare life-limiting genetic condition called Costello syndrome, but she seemed to have a very extreme form of it. So we massively adjusted our course and our sales. And I mean, that's why my book was called Was This in the Plan? Because I was frequently heard to utter, was this in the plan? When you start off in life, all of us, we start off and we think we know, we have a plan for life, maybe find a life partner, maybe have kids if you want that, maybe whatever. And things happen. And this, this huge curveball of this wonderful girl arrived in our lives. And as I said to you yesterday, we were expecting to have our 4th child, a second daughter. It was going to be wonderful, 2 boys, 2 girls, and it absolutely was wonderful. But when you have a child with a disability, you have a period of adjustment, particularly when that child's born with a congenital disability, of mourning the child you thought you were going to have, then growing to get to know this new child, and then being hit with a bombshell, but she's probably not going to survive till adulthood. So we were always living in the shadow of knowing that we were living on borrowed time with Daisy, and in many ways not knowing what was to come, but in many ways it prepared us for really understanding that life is finite. And this is something I say to everyone, we have one guarantee in life: we're going to die. We don't know when, we don't know how we're going to die, but I think we all live as though we're going to go on forever. And I think Daisy very much taught us that, do you know what? It puts so much into perspective. We don't know how long we've got with this girl. We don't know, this hospital admission, is this going to be the last one or not? So we just got on with living and trying as much as we could to not sweat the small stuff. So when Daisy was born, we had then 4 children, 7, 5, 2, and Daisy. I had to give up my career. So I had this really successful marketing career, and I had to be her full-time carer, advocate, as well as her mum, as well as mum to the others. And Andy basically, was supporting us all. So we went from 2 incomes to 1. And we just got on. And I think very much our mantra was to just enjoy the little things, because I think we really appreciated that these were the big things. And so we had this kind of roller coaster ride with Daisy, not knowing what was going to happen, bringing our children up. And then I think it was 2014, it happened so quickly that Andy started losing weight. And it's funny because we'd been to a family wedding in the June. And I remember saying to him, hey, mate, it's starting to put on a bit of the old middle-age spread. He'd not long turned 50, 51. You might want to, don't let that go too far. And I remember one morning him saying, God, I couldn't fit into these trousers months ago. Look at me, I'm losing all this weight. And I'm like, how? And he said, I don't know, but I'm not questioning it. But I knew then what I know now, because within the space of about 2 months, he lost 2 stone and became really, really ill. And late October, early November, he was having some bleeding from his bottom. And my father had died of bowel cancer in 2000. So he didn't delay. He went to the GP, was referred to a colonoscopy. And as Andy was sort of coming round after the anaesthetic, the gastroenterologist came out, and it had been a very difficult procedure to do the colonoscopy. And I'll never forget, he just said, well, Andy, we found something, and I think it's cancer. And I think we mouthed a very rude word, begins with F, as we looked at each other. And so suddenly, cancer entered our lives. And he was found on diagnosis, because obviously, when you have a diagnosis of cancer, they do all this staging. It was a very invasive, very aggressive stage 4 incurable bowel cancer. And so he started on treatment, and yeah, we had to adjust to the fact that he was not going to be around. And I do also remember the gastroenterologist saying to me, this is really aggressive, this is going to be full on, this is going to bring you to your knees. And I thought, you don't know what we've been through to even get to this point, because Daisy had experienced multiple episodes of sepsis. You know, we had kept her alive already to the age of 10, and not just a really good quality of life. And I think after the initial shock of Andy's cancer diagnosis, we just, once again, we set about living, and we took what we had learned with Life with Daisy to focus our lives then. The treatment that Andy was on was really aggressive and brutal, and he would go in, and anyone that supported anyone through cancer and has had the sort of brutal chemo that he was on, it would be every few weeks he would go in, it would be 48 hours of infusions, 2 weeks of just chemo fog, 2 weeks of emerging from chemo fog, and then back in. So those 2 weeks when he wasn't on chemo fog, we would just go out and do family stuff. And for us, it was, it was never about the big things. We did, you know, with the kids, we did Disney and stuff. But the things that we cherished the most was being together as a family, sitting on the sofa, watching a film, gathered around the table, all of us under one roof together. Andy's treatment was tough. He was started on some experimental radiotherapy, and Daisy's condition is really rare. There's a 1 in 1.25 million chance of having a child with Costello syndrome. It's a very sporadic thing. So we do rare. There was a very rare side effect to this radiotherapy, that it could cause liver damage, radiation activated liver damage. And it did, yeah. So they had to stop the chemo in order to allow the liver to recover, and in doing so, the cancer spread. So the night before Andy's birthday, literally just almost a year, just over a year after he was diagnosed, the oncologist told him, there's nothing more we can do, and we need to make plans. But even then, because we'd been under the palliative care team for Daisy, we knew that palliative wasn't about giving up. And you know, working with the palliative team, we then made plans. He was really clear he wanted to come home. We made some visits to his family in Scotland while he was still well enough. We did what we could, and then he was in hospital. He'd become quite ill, and it was clear that we needed to act quickly. And brought him home. I think it was something like December the 10th, and he died at home on December the 14th. And that was, you know, then, so just before Christmas, just before Daisy's birthday, and Andy had died. It was just, I mean, you just go into autopilot. And all I could think, and we were chatting about this yesterday, particularly, and I say this all the time, people can't believe I say it, I was lucky. I had kids. The kids kept me going. We had Daisy's birthday. Daisy, because she had a learning disability, you know, her birthdays, Christmas, they were huge events. She obsessed with them. I had to do her birthday. We had to do a big thing for her birthday. So that was like literally a week after Andy died. Then we had Christmas. We had to do that. And then I had to organise a funeral. You know, and his memorial, because, you know, we had people wanting to gather. So we had a big memorial in what was his old drama school. And then we had his funeral. And then I found myself... there I was, a widowed mum with 4 children, one of whom was going to die very young. And Daisy's health deteriorated. And I think grief is a very physical thing as well as an emotional thing. And I think for all of us, it took its toll. I look back at photos and I was tired, I was worn. And I think for Daisy, she lost a lot of her fight. She missed her daddy so much that she lost a lot of that strength to be able to fight all of the things that were happening to her, and it was just becoming overwhelming. And just 13 months after Andy died, Daisy was taken into hospital and ended up in intensive care, intubated on a ventilator in Great Ormond Street. And I had to make the decision to remove all of her life support because there was no going back. And so, yeah, 13 months after losing my husband, I then had to prepare for the funeral of my daughter. And I found myself both a widow and a bereaved parent and a mother to 3 grieving children. So, yeah, I had to put my own grief on hold and try and reform our family in many ways.
I mean, what a horrendously traumatic amount of, emotion, grief, challenges. I mean, not to mention trying to, mother 3 other children at the same time. Wow. And
Yeah.
one of the things that, and I've spoken about it a couple of times in this series, one of the things that Way does is it provides you with people like yourself who have been through stuff that are still going on, still doing all right, still finding ways. In fact, in many cases, finding power in pain and pushing through to achieve great things, driven by that stuff, right? So well done you. That's you know, I'm sure you don't feel like it's a great achievement, but it
I
really is.
I think, I mean, there's a couple of things that came out of it. I think especially when you're a parent and you have children relying on you, I had to kind of package up my grief and put it on hold until I could be ready to grieve and to allow it to all come out. And I did that when Andy died and then Daisy died. It was like I had to continue packaging it up. And I'll talk about how then I dealt with it and how it did come out. But I, after Andy died, I mean, I remember going to register his death, and he was diagnosed with cancer when I was 46, and he died. And I always say that when he was diagnosed with cancer, in some ways that's when my marriage ended, and as in, you become a widow because your marriage is only because cancer became our lives. I lost my husband to cancer before he even died because that was the focus. Everything was the focus, was getting
Yeah.
through this. And in some, we knew he was not going to survive it. But I went to register his death, and I remember seeing this little card holder at the registrar's office, and it was awful because I remember registering my children's births at this place, and this little card holder had the widowed and young cards, the Way cards. I remember picking it up, I'd never heard of the charity before, and thinking, God, that's me. That's some exclusive club, isn't it? But I'd always written. So I'd started keeping a blog. I've always been a writer. I've always written. I've always worked in communications, and I was working, trying to do a bit of freelance journalism. But I started a blog in 2008 when Daisy was at the beginning of what ended up being a year in Great Ormond Street, because for me, writing's always been therapy, and it was a way of making meaning out of all of this. But also, I wanted to give some insight into this world of which I had no prior experience. And then when everything else happened in my life, I had to share that too. So after Andy died, I started writing my first book, which was really our story about us meeting and, having Daisy and adjusting, and how life can throw you all these lemons, and, you make lemonade sort of thing. And you sort of adjust your sails. And it was when the book was in edit, it was when Daisy died. But the book was published on what would have been our 25th wedding anniversary. But it was a really important part for me of trying to get it all out, but also to try and share that it didn't break me. And I think this was really important. I couldn't fall apart. I couldn't. My kids said, I don't know how I would have been if I didn't have kids. I mean, the thing is, if I didn't have kids, then the whole thing with Daisy wouldn't have happened. But I had to get up in the morning, and I had to, when the year after Andy died, I had to deal with all of the medical stuff, and, the times when she was rushed into hospital and the juggling. I just, if I fell apart, what was going to happen to them? And I had to keep going. And then there was a point where I had this really silly, very minor car accident where I banged my head and I ended up in an ambulance and in A&E, and it all came flooding back. It was a lot, well, it was PTSD. And that's when I went into therapy. That was when it was like, okay, you can let some of this out now. You're allowed to be vulnerable. But yeah, so.
And being vulnerable. So I have found that there is more power in vulnerability than strength in keeping it together, right?
Totally, yeah.
When you got to that point where you went into therapy and you were allowing yourself to be vulnerable, what was it like?
I mean, it was a very strange feeling, because if I go all the way back to when Daisy was born and I became what we call in that word, like a medical mum, medical parent, it's even, you become, and it's the sort of nature of my business, it's very difficult to ask for help. And because I'd always had to be so strong, when Andy died, it was like, I've got this because I have to, because the kids have only got one parent now, and I have to be mum and dad for them. And I was so scared of, if I allowed myself to go to those dark places and process it all, I might not come out. But actually, going into therapy was really good. In fact, I mean, for anyone that's watching this that's maybe very early on their grief journey, and for any sort of grief, I initially, in the first sort of 6 months, I went to counselling and I wasn't ready. And I realised, looking back, and sometimes, and I've spoken to a lot of people, sometimes you need almost that adrenaline to wear off of everything that's happened, go through the anniversaries, and then be in a space. And I almost needed to have everything in a good space. I needed to know that my kids were safe and that they were happy. Their therapy was the priority. Their support was the priority before mine. Yeah. And then I was ready. So yeah, I found that a lot chatting to people, that sometimes people say, yeah, I went to therapy, it didn't work. And I would say, you may not have been in the right headspace for it. You never know. But yeah, when you do need it, and it is really important to be able to open it and to process that. And then stuff that came out was stuff that really surprised me. I allowed myself to, now anyone that knows me knows I'm really open. So, I allowed myself to uncover feelings that I had hidden away. So I was really angry with Andy for dying. It's like, yeah, cheers, thanks. Everyone turns up for your funeral and everything, and we give you an amazing send-off. But like, life has now gone on, and here I am trying to be mum and dad and hold it all together. And there was a real sense of, anger that, again, talking to other widows and widowers can often come out. Because, and I mean, this is something that you've probably found, and other widows and widowers have found, that it's not the first year. Sometimes it's the second year. Sometimes it can really hit you, because that reality bites, because life goes on, and then you realise, I'm alone here. This is it.
Yeah, so I certainly found that I went a year, not a year. The time for me isn't really the relevant part, but it was about going from a period of time where I was just surviving to then realizing that I needed to live. Yeah. And actually that change in mindset, whilst has ended up being liberating, because actually I've found that we spoke a little bit yesterday. I talk about this theory of post-traumatic growth, right? Now, I don't for a second believe that people are happier because someone has died. That doesn't make sense, right? But your appreciation of happiness, or your appreciation of the good things in life, the gratitude you have for the moments that you get to experience and have experienced, is greater value. And therefore, I found that, I had this period of time where I was just surviving, just focusing on Molly, just going in autopilot a day at a time. Couldn't even look past an hour in the first few months. Like, it was really tough. And then I got to this point where I'd got all of that stuff in order. Molly's routine was down. She was clearly adjusting really well. I'd started this business and had started to win work, and was going to be able to provide for Molly working from home and all of that stuff. But then it just all felt empty, because, there was no person to share it with. There was no, and that's when I then started to realize that I needed to start finding a way to live for me again, and actually that was really, really difficult.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important point, because I think, Andy was ill for a year. So, I mean, I know I'd adjusted to being a carer for Daisy. Being your partner's carer is so hard, because you do have to put all your emotions down, because the person you most want to share it and discuss it all with is the person you're caring for. So, and doing that, in many ways, you put a lot of yourself on hold. And then when they die, if you're trying to keep going for family and loved ones, again, you kind of, you do lose sight of yourself. And that was something that really struck me, that there was a point in time that I just realized that I didn't know who I was, because I was so busy being there for everyone else that I'd lost sight of me. I'd been Andy's wife, so I was supporting him through chemo, and I dealt with the majority of all of the medical stuff. When he was dying at home, because Daisy had intravenous infusions, and she was dependent on a nutrition system called total parenteral nutrition. So I used to have to put an IV drip up every night for her, and various IVs. So I remember, he was not home for very long at the end of life. But one night our nurse was going to be late for Daisy, so I did all of Daisy's IVs, then did another tray, and went and did Andy's IVs. I mean, that's, and did his, and I was just kind of in autopilot. And so there was that moment of realization. The other thing I found after he died, after Daisy died, was I just needed to fill the space. So I was so busy. I was manically busy. So I was writing, speaking at engagements. I was just doing everything. And I look back now, and I mean, it's the nature of who I am. People on here that know me know I'm always busy, and I'm always doing things, and I've always got a gazillion projects on the go. And now they are projects that I choose, and I make sure I have downtime and space for myself. But at the time, I was just like, I just didn't want that space, because I didn't want to let any intrusive thoughts come in.
No.
And then, but there was this big turning point, and this point in time where I could start to properly grieve and not move on. You never move on, but you process it all and think about it, and
you get to a point of acceptance, right? And you move forward. I like move forward rather than move on, because it doesn't matter what happens tomorrow, it's still coming, right? If you're the one that's left here, you've still got to find a way to move forward into that next day.
Totally. I was always, my sons are on the autistic spectrum, so their language is very literal, and in many ways they were able to process Andy's death a lot better than neurotypicals, because for them it's black and white. He's alive, he's dead, and I'm sad that he's dead. And actually in many ways that was for me. So it wasn't kind of mourning, I want him back. It was just this big gaping hole. I'd met him when I was 20, and so my whole life had been in a relationship. We brought up children. It was just you kind of joined. You go through stuff. We went through all this stuff that nobody else had experienced, all this life stuff, seeing our children being brought into the world, and then he's gone. And I remember this, it's when Andy was an actor. I remember an actor friend of his whose husband had died. He posted on Twitter about the thing he missed the most, and his husband died a year before Andy had died. He said what he missed more than anything was the reciprocity. So you could shout out questions to the sky, and you could ask, but you're never ever going to get that answer back. Why did you die? Or even then stuff, because the kids were old, growing, they were all teenagers, they were all under 18 when Andy died. And then you start to have to make these big decisions, parenting decisions, about, will I let the boyfriend stay over? It's like, and I'm never going to know now. I think we have some values and things, but I can't ask him, I can't lean on him for that. And that was that reciprocity, was something that was really stark. in my life that, yeah, I will, you know, I have friends who've divorced and they maybe go through mediation and they can ask these things or they can discuss. When you said that, what did you mean? But, you know, I could just think about it. I thought, I'll never know. I'll never be able to ask him. Yeah, it was a really, there are all sorts of weird things that come up that, again, until you've lost your partner, until you've been through that, you don't know. And of course, everyone's grief is different. Everyone's grief is unique to them. So what I went through and the feelings I went through were completely and utterly unique to me, compared to someone else. And I think, and people used to say to me, oh God, how do you cope? How do you do it? And, you know, we had been prepared in so many ways by our life prior to that. And that's how I coped. Yeah. But there's a point where you can say, you can take your foot off now. You can stop. You know?
I feel like when you go through these sorts of life-altering moments, you become a walking meme, right? Like these memes that you see on social media all the time, and you just think, oh, that's just something nice someone's written. You know, things like nobody knows how strong they are until that strength is tested, and all of those things. And you know, I actually started to save some because I was like, actually, no, this all feels like I'm living this now. So it doesn't just feel like it, you know, it's something nice somebody wrote anymore. Yeah. But you become a bit of a walking meme, don't you? You start to find these sayings really resonate with you and find different meanings in things, and it's all very.
I didn't want it. You know, I didn't want to be that. Oh my God, that poor woman. You know, when Daisy was born, you know, I had to have a child with the most rare of syndromes. You know, and she had to be. You know, she was amazing. She was just. You know, and Daisy was never going to let us slip out the spotlight. She would, you know, everyone, you know, people weren't allowed to walk past with her without her waving and, you know, giving her some attention. So, you know, you're in that spotlight. And then I was just really conscious that, God, I'm that woman whose husband and daughter have died. And it didn't strike me until people started sort of sending cards and messages. And I thought, God, yeah, it's unimaginable. If someone told me that story and it had happened to someone else, I'd just be like, how do you get through that? And you know, it was layer upon layer upon layer of it, of rubbishness, you know, and just awfulness. I mean, Andy's cancer diagnosis was so out of the blue, and you know, and he was a reasonably fit man. He was vegetarian, didn't drink much, you know, but yeah, but it was just, yeah, unbelievable. But we just, as I say, we adjusted ourselves, because it's like, you can spend all your time raging and asking, why me? And you're not going to change it. I was not going to change Andy's cancer. What they had hoped was to buy us time. We really hoped to buy enough time so that our youngest son would turn 18. We couldn't even contemplate day, because we lived day to day with Daisy anyway. But you know, sometimes chemo works and sometimes it doesn't. And the way the tumours were, they were wrapped around his hepatic artery. They could have been operable if they hadn't been. But I'm not a person who will ever dwell on, well, could have been, should have been. I mean, even with Daisy, I have never dwelt on the possibility that what if she hadn't had that gene mutation? What would she be doing now? Maybe she wouldn't be Daisy, so it's not even a question.
And it's not anything that any amount of what ifs could have changed, right? Like you said, there's nothing.
And that's what I mean. It becomes wasted energy then, because all you're doing is you're channeling all this negative energy into something that can't change. And I wanted to channel it into something positive. So the writing, you know, was something very, you know, that was therapeutic and was something positive. And I know has helped people, because I get lots of feedback from, you know, the speaking stuff. And then, you know, we absolutely, in that final year with Andy, we made most of our finite time, and I think I use it as an opportunity to say to people, we all are living with an end date, and we have to make most of that finite time So we did, when the chemo fog lifted, we'd go off and do stuff. And he had one last trip to Glastonbury. And we did one thing that he really, really, really wanted to do and made it happen. He got to meet Dave Grohl, and we watched the Foo Fighters. We went to see the Foo Fighters. We were guests of the Foos, and that was just, it was never, I'd always thought, bucket list and everything, but it was, and that was great. But the things I cherish the most will always be just the family banter, the time together when there were 6 of us.
I mean, when we spoke yesterday, I told you about an obsession I had, didn't I? Where we received Lauren's terminal diagnosis, and I'd go into work, and I'd say to people, as I speak it now, every hour I spend in this office is an hour less that I get to spend with my wife and child, who I know, my wife's on borrowed time. I got to the point where I would literally calculate, if Lauren was to live to an average life age of 75. And we only had the weekends because we both worked. This is how many days of Lauren I would have. Yeah. And I worked out that it was something like 12 years or 14 years worth of non-working for me to ever get that back. Yeah. And so I became obsessed with it. A slight trigger warning with this one, because I know for everybody it doesn't feel the same, but coronavirus came along and lockdowns happened. And for me, I have an element of gratitude for that, because actually I got 5 months in my house with Lauren before she died. We went into lockdown at the end of March, early April, and she died in the following August. Mm-hmm. So that thing that I had spoken about every hour I'm in the office is an hour less with my family. Yeah. That COVID meant that actually that wasn't a problem for me anymore. And it was those little things like sitting in the garden, the weather was lovely, and we could just sit and watch Molly play in the paddling pool together. And those are the things that I think, of all of the bucket list stuff that we did, those were the things that, like you say, we really, really appreciated.
Yeah.
And
this is what I say to people. And sadly for me, it took, the birth of a very sick little girl, and, the death of my husband, the death of my daughter, to realise what's important and to have some perspective. To really think about what I want to do now. I mean, it took me a lot of therapy to think about what I wanted to do. Yeah. But, to appreciate things, because I think, the person that I was, and I have my life in, so you probably do the same. You have these points of time, your cancer diagnosis, all these things. The person I was before 2004, before Daisy was born, is not the person I am now. I mean, obviously I'm a lot older, but, but I had different values and priorities, and knowing now what I know, which is why I do, a lot of talking, a lot of writing and sharing with people about, just think about what's important to you and how you want to organise your life around that. And, sadly, it took all that stuff to happen to me to get to that point, and to make me the person I am is, the other thing, we talk about resilience and stuff, and it's someone, if I could go all the way back to that night in the pub when I met Andy, and someone had then done this whole massive fast forward to, and this is your life, I'd have run a mile. But it's incredible what the human spirit can take. And ultimately we do all have a choice. I could have walked away. There's so many people, but we chose, and it is incredible. A lot of people say I couldn't have done it. It's like, oh my God, where did you get that strength from? And none of us knows. You just do it. You do it for love. Yeah. And you just and you also, and my mantra was always, every day, put one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. Just get through the day. Just get through, And then, it's something, I'm still here, I'm still standing, So.
And eventually you get to the point where it's no longer one foot in front of the other and a day at a time. You get to the point where you're starting to then think, multiple days or weeks, or even you get to the point where it's months. And at some point, hopefully, and it isn't the case for everyone, and there's no timeline on when that should happen, but at some point you get to the point where you start to see a future, a proper future again, I think.
Yeah. I couldn't see, after the bereavements, I couldn't see I didn't know where I was and who I was, because so much of my life had been given into caring, and I couldn't see what I wanted and where I was going to go. I just couldn't see it. I just didn't, because I'd so stuck in like this living day to day. And then it was eventually being allowed to stop being so hypervigilant and thinking it's going to be all right, and start to think about, and it's not about moving on, you know, it's acceptance. It is acceptance of Andy's not going to come back, Daisy's not going to come back. My life as I knew it is not going to be the same again, ever. You know, it will never be the same again. But I am still allowed to have a life for me, and I'm still allowed to carve out a new life. So, you know, I can still have hopes and dreams. I felt really sad. I'm too old, you know. You know, there's no time. But you know, then again, it's like, yeah, Andy died before his time. Daisy died before her time. And you know, if you start to overprocess it and overthink of it, it drives you crazy. It's almost like, just get on with living. But the one thing, as I said to you yesterday, the one thing I say to everyone, get on with living, but have those difficult conversations. So yesterday, anyone that follows my public Facebook page, was this in the plan, I shared a post because it was the anniversary of Jim Henson's death. And it's something that I've mentioned previously in a blog post that I'd done, is he died very suddenly, I think it was about 32 years ago, of sepsis, which is what Daisy died of. And he didn't know he was going to die of sepsis, but a few years before, he'd written a letter to his children, and he'd also written down all his funeral wishes, because he just thought, well, just in case anything does happen, I want my children to know how much they, you know, I want to write it down that I love them, and I want people who are organising my funeral to know I want a New Orleans jazz band, actually, he said, and you know, and I want them to, so that they don't have to worry about these things. And so I always say to people that doing things like having those difficult conversations doesn't mean you're about to pop your clogs, and don't leave it till it's too late. I mean, I had to organise 2 funerals in the space of a year. And I remember it was the same funeral director. I mean, just remember making that phone call after Daisy died, thinking, this is like deja vu. But she said to me, oh God, Steph, you know, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but it's so easy working with you, because you've got in your mind, you've got ideas. And she said, I often get families here and it's their grandma that they're burying, and they're distraught. And this is a 90-year-old woman, they're distraught. And she said, we have hours of going through stuff. And she, you know, did they never talk about the fact that, you know, she was going to die? So they have to work out, you know, did she want to be cremated or a funeral? Did she want a religious ceremony or not? You know, a non-religious, all of those sort of things. Whereas, you know, again, I think, you know, having a bit of time allowed us to talk through those things. But, you know, you never know if you've got time. Like I said to you yesterday, ironically, and it's a word that people know I use a lot, I was lucky. Because everything, you know, you put things into perspective and you hear other people's stories. I had time with Andy to have some of those conversations and to do things that some people never get. Some people's partners die suddenly in whatever way, and they never have a chance to say goodbye. They never have. So I always say to people, just, you know, kind of bear that in mind and have those conversations. Make a will. Please make a will. Especially if you've got children under 18. I mean, things I discovered. So when one partner dies and there are children, if you haven't, and you know, if you haven't named someone to look after the children, then, you know, potentially they may have to go into care while it's worked out if you haven't expressed your wishes. Those are things that people just don't want to think about it. But, you know, hopefully someone listening today might think, didn't know that one. Advanced Directive. So Andy and I talked a lot. We had talked a lot about Daisy and how far we would go in terms of intervention. I knew when she had a cardiac arrest, when she was at end of life, that we did not want to continue resuscitation, because Andy and I had talked about this. We didn't want to continue if we knew that the Daisy that we had was not going to be back with us, because she wouldn't be happy. And you can make an advance directive that talks about, because it's not automatic that your next of kin can switch off your life support. If you have if you're an adult and over 18, so even an 18-year-old, and you are in a, sorry, this is a trigger warning, in a car accident, and you end up in a persistent vegetative state, and you haven't said, I don't want to be kept alive in that state, you know, I don't want to be resuscitated or whatever, then your next of kin doesn't necessarily have the right to make those decisions on your behalf. There can be a lot of negotiation with medical professionals. These are all things, and my kids call me the Grim Reaper, these are all things that I know because of my own personal experience. So you can do things, you can go on, as if you Google Dying Matters, and you can download an advance directive form that you can just express those things, you know, your resuscitation wishes and so on. So, you know, stuff like that. And then I always, when, you know, I mean, the kids know what songs I would like played at my funeral, and that's always that's the best one, because you just, as soon as you say to someone, well, what song would you like to be played at your funeral, it opens up so much conversation. It's such a good icebreaker, you know.
Yeah, and Death Chat is, you know, it's something that crops up. I've done, you know, this is my 4th week of these conversations, and every week I think we've spoken about how people that haven't experienced significant bereavement, or, you know, life-altering bereavement, or anything above what you would expect to experience, don't have the best understanding or the right tool set to be prepared for conversations around death, and whether that be preparing children, whether that be supporting someone who's grieving, whether, you know, whatever it is, whatever aspect of that death chat that needs to be there, we're just not good enough at it as a society.
I think, yeah, culturally we don't do death, we don't talk about it, and we're scared of talking about it. It's like a taboo, and we really do, you know. And as I say, I go back to that kind of 90-year-old grandmother at the funeral director's example. It's like, we're shocked when someone died. You know, it is, unfortunately, it's the only fact of life that is absolutely, as I say, guaranteed. That we should, and even there's a great book by an author I know called Kevin Toulis called My Father's Wake, and he talks about, you know, how we're almost it's almost become like an industry, the death industry, and we don't engage with death, which is why we're so scared of it, and we just think, you know, I mean, when Andy was diagnosed and we knew it was terminal, we accepted that it was terminal. What we wanted to do was just give ourselves as much time as possible, but we knew that medical science can only do so much, and this was the same with Daisy. And then, you know, that kind of focuses you, but we don't engage, we don't see death, we don't see dead bodies. So, you know, for me, you know, when Daisy died, we took her to the children's hospice, and, you know, we dressed her in her favourite dressing up outfit, and we put flowers in her hair, and my daughter put makeup on her. And as she said to me, this being with Daisy like this is really helping me with how I feel about Dad, you know, and just accepting that kind of transition. And then, you know, how we then send people off, you know, funerals are for the living, not for the dead. They're a way of collectively supporting the grieving people. They're really important. But, you know, if they're important to you, and if it's what you need, for me, I needed to just be surrounded by people, and for my kids to see how much their dad was loved, and to hear from other people that were coming to the funeral the stories, and, you know, and to feel that they were supported and weren't alone, and that they were cared for. And the funeral was very much a part of being able to do that.
Absolutely. Brutal. And actually, you know, the more prepared you could be for your loved ones, the easier it is for them to go through organising that thing that is so important to them. So, Steph, I'm really conscious of the time. The media team at Way continually tell me, Sam, you keep running this too close to the hour mark, and we will not be able to use it if you run it over an hour. So we've got just a little bit of time left, and I'm conscious that there's, your story is so gripping, and I've not wanted to interrupt it. And you've given so many really, really good, helpful bits of advice. No, not at all. And I don't know if you've noticed the comments coming up, but lots of people talking about how strong and inspirational you are. There's been a couple of questions, I'm sorry, that we've not been able to answer. But if I can, I just want to give you a couple of quick fire questions before we close. These are about, because we've not really spoken much about how writing and books and that sort of stuff. Obviously, we've mentioned that you were doing it, but we've not really spoken about how it helped you. Could you just give us a quick...
I mean, for me, writing has always been my go-to, and finding a creative outlet, I think, is really important. So for me, it was writing. I know for my daughter, she did a lot of painting. My son, he went to music therapy. So the blogging was always important. I was able to get my thoughts down, and I mean, the people that know me or know me through the blog know I'm very open. It's no holds barred. It never is, because this is it. This is life, warts and all. Writing the book was, I mean, I still get so much positive feedback that it helps people, and I wanted to, some people say to me, I can't articulate in the way you can, but those words you wrote have really helped me, and I just feel that if I can do that, but also I really encourage people to find an outlet or to write and to express their feelings, because people say to me, how do you write? And it's like, you sit down, you write words. And I mean, I write every single day. I'm writing something. For my job, I write. And I write thousands of words every day because I love writing. And I love telling stories. I've been doing a lot of work now, actually interviewing a lot of other families and telling their stories. But writing, and then to have been able to make a living out of it was crucial. I also wrote a book to how to support children. So I did, my first book was This in the Plan. There's another one in the pipeline which will be coming out later this year, called Anything for My Child. But I wrote a book because it really struck me after Daisy died, was how do you support young children, particularly young children, through grief and bereavement, and particularly when they've got a learning disability. Because, just because you've got a learning disability doesn't mean you don't feel grief and loss and frustration and anger. So I wrote about all the stuff that I'd learnt about supporting my kids, and particularly Daisy, through how to articulate her feelings around grief, which is as valid for maybe a young child that doesn't have the big words yet. So I wanted to use my writing. Always my writing is about I don't want it to be about my story. I want it to help other people and then to share other people's stories. It's about enabling conversations and enabling people to think, do you know what? Reflect. I think about that. I'm going to approach things differently. That's what if I can do that, then through my writing, I know I've succeeded. If I can get something thought-provoking where people think, even tonight, if you all go off and tomorrow make an appointment to meet, you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So talk to me then very quickly about how Way was part of this journey for you, because obviously, as you alluded to earlier, it's a pretty exclusive club. We talk about being unfortunate to be eligible, I think it is the word that people use. So talk to me about Way and how they have supported you. And I'm just conscious we've got about 2.5 minutes, so I'll expect a quick answer.
So as I say, I got the card. I hadn't heard of Way. I got it when I was registering Andy's death, and it was a real whoa. I am widowed and young, and although I've never been on a Way meetup, for me, because with kids and juggling and everything, to be able to have that virtual community has been incredible. To be able to share with other people, and we have lots of now little subgroups. There's widows who are also caring for children who have additional needs, and it's like, there's other people like me out there, and who get it, who understand. But also, I think what's been brilliant with Way is that shared experience, and then you find your kind of tribe within the tribe, of that shared sense of humor, that weird sense of humor that some of us have, and certain people you just click with. I mean, I think I've seen her on here die in the Isle of Wight. You know, we so have to meet because there's real kindred spirits. You know, she's Welsh, her husband was the same sort of age as Andy, and, you know, she's got boys with additional needs. And, you know, I'd never have met you. How do I know?
Yeah.
Ironically, isn't it ironic? But yeah, to have that support and to that group of people, because it is exclusive. People don't expect a young woman, man, to be widowed, and particularly for a woman. You know, I think people just think, oh, she's divorced. No, my husband died. You know, it's like, and it's so shocking. But you can share that in our community, and you can meet up, and there's so much going on that I was intended to do, never did. But to feel that there's a group of friends out there who just get it, particularly in the early hours of the morning when the thoughts are all in your head. You know, there's something going to be online. And that's what's so great.
I mean, it's
so brilliant.
fantastic, isn't it? And you know, I know that it's offered me things that I wouldn't have otherwise had access to. So that's been great. So
Absolutely.
what I'm going to have to do now, Steph, I could talk to you all night. You're so interesting. Your story's so powerful. You've got such good insight for everybody that is dealing with this stuff or may deal with this stuff in the future. Some of the things that you've shared about, you know, getting your will written and all of those bits have been really, really helpful. But we are out of time, so I'm going to have to just close by saying thank you. There's been lots of lovely comments, and if there's anything you'd like to part with, then great. Otherwise, we'll call it there.
I think just thank you, and I think anyone out there that is grieving and going through a loss, I think, you know, just talking, sharing, and knowing that eventually you find a point where life in some way goes on. You find a new life, but it's, you know, you never miss that person, or you never lose sight of that person and what they brought to your life. It's a funny old world, isn't it?
It certainly is. Okay, well, so Steph, thank you. And I'm just going to remind people that we're back next Tuesday at 8 o'clock. Next Tuesday, we have Holly Matthews joining us, who is an actress, sadly lost her husband, has gone on to be a life coach and is writing books and stuff like that. So that will be another great story and another great chat. So thank you again, and look forward to speaking to you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.